Yeah, gotta aim for the top like, hold up. Yeah, I can never doubt myself, I know better. All of you critics be acting like you know better. Blowing the smoke, but I know when the dust settles that I'm in my element. It's evident that there's levels to the game.
So what's happening, people? Welcome back to the Athletes to Athletes podcast. Happy to be back with my man, CEO and co-founder Reid Meyer. I'm Ryan Holmes, and we're looking forward to today's conversation. We've got a couple of different topics that we are looking to dig into, some around NIL, mostly around NIL, kind of the opt-ins and the opt-outs, some of the different fallout that has taken place, I guess, since the House versus NCAA case was settled, and I'm going to put that in quotes. Because as one thing is settled, it means that more things crop up all the time. But as we do, we love to do kind of a quick hitter before getting to those topics. And my quick hitter isn't on the college side of things; it's on the professional side of things, and it deals with the power of athletes and their voices today. As we've seen on the professional sports lens, football season's right around the corner. So everybody's talking about these contract negotiations with Micah Parsons and Trey Hendrickson and some of these, big time stars on these teams. And then obviously we've had conversations about the new CBA with WNBA players and how at the All-Star they were wearing the pay us what you owe us t-shirts. Regardless of how you feel about that, we are in the era of athletes having a bigger voice, and it's not just on it's not just on the professional side of things where athletes are entering into contract negotiations, but it's also on the NCAA side where athletes are having more of a voice into these things. And the owners and the powers that be are trying to get creative in order to hold on to the 99% of power that they've had throughout sports for the longest time. And I feel like the old guard has to change now. They're being forced to change because athletes now have a voice to come out and speak their mind. And in the case of Micah Parsons, he has his own channel, right? He has his own platform that he can jump on his own podcast and discuss literally what is going on. When he asked for a trade from the Cowboys, he put out his own thing on his own social media, right? The letter was very long, but thank God there are different people that dissected it and kind of gave the ins and outs and the summary of that very long thing that he posted. But athletes are now feeling empowered to do those things. And I think that changing landscape of sports, not just on the professional side, but on the college side as well, is really starting to turn. And it's not just a rev share thing. It's holistically of being part of the negotiations and making sure that people are doing right by them and that they're paid their worth. So I think it's a great thing. I think it's awesome to see these athletes speaking up, because for the longest time, athletes didn't have a say in a lot of those things. And there was obviously a lot more athletes like, the Michael Jordans of the world and the Emmett Smiths of the world, guys that had to truly earn a lot of these things that players now are getting as they're walking into the door. But that next wave of let's earn our keep is now happening, and it's happening through the era of digital media and utilizing these tools, be it your Twitter account or a podcast platform or whatever it is, to do that. And I think it's a great thing. Hopefully they continue to feel empowered and get to the point where they want to get to when it comes to the desired ROI for themselves.
Yeah, it's funny. Yours and mine both quick hitter have nothing to do with college today. I'm going on the other side of the spectrum. Little less contract work, I would imagine in mine. Man, the Little League World Series is back, and the Little League
Yeah.
Softball World Series is back, and I freaking love this time of the year. I don't know what it is. It taps into like a very sort of, I guess, nostalgic aspect of my own upbringing, like being a baseball player. Like it's fun watching and kind of remembering back on my age at that time. And it's
hmm
this really interesting precipice where like You have some kids that haven't quite gone through puberty yet, and they're like 4'11" and they're like 75 pounds, and then their teammate that comes up next to them is like 5'10", 150 pounds. So they're just like it's the most hilarious like time of life for these kids playing. It's you have these games where I think I just watched a game earlier today where a team was down 4-0 into the last inning of the game, and they end up like two runs get walked in, they get a hit, they win the game 5-4. Like just crazy stuff can happen during this whole
Yeah,
thing.
to upset last year's champion, I believe is what it was
Is
this
that what
morning.
it was? Yeah, okay, yeah, against the Florida team. So like
Yep.
it just is, I don't know, man. There's something about it's just electric is to watch that stuff. And like the girls, like I think I watched like Japan play Canada maybe the other day internationally. Like it's just fun, man. Like I don't know what it is. It's this weird thing that happens once a year. It doesn't make any sense why we have 12 and 13-year-olds on television, but like it really is fun. And I will give Little League credit. You know, you hear and you see some stuff like in the stands occasionally from parents that are a little bit off the wall just because that's, you know, the culture that we live in now from
Hmm.
youth sports society. I will give Little League credit, man. The every time you watch it, it is plastered with Little League sponsored stuff that just reminds parents and people of like these kids are 12 years old and like they're
Yeah.
here to have a good time. Everyone needs to calm down. Like this is yes, you want to win. Yes, it's fun. This is a really unique thing, but like chill out is essentially the whole vibe on there. So I don't know, man. I just get a kick out of it. I got such fond memories of like my dad and I watch it every year together. Like we'll talk more about the Little League World Series and the Little League Softball World Series in the next 2 weeks than we will possibly about the entirety of the MLB baseball season when it comes down to it. So I don't know, man. It's super fun, and I'm so happy that it's going on right now. It's just awesome.
Yeah, it's the purity of the sport, right? Like there's so many things that we watch and everybody talks about how sports are being corrupted day in and day out and how NIL is changing the purity of college sports. Well, if you're longing for that purity of sport, watch the Little League World Series. Even though these Little League players have, the elbow guards and chin guards
Yeah.
and sliding mitts and all these things that they see on TV from guys that they look up to. I feel like just the purity of the sport is still there. We haven't lost it completely. As we look at youth sports and say, man, there's so many different aspects of this that we didn't have where parents are in a way corrupting certain things on that youth level as we talked about before with Dan, but it is good to see that there is still some purity of the sport and just having fun and kids going out and winning and sportsmanship is at the utmost during these games too.
Mhm.
Something that gets lost as you get a little older. So I'm right there with you. It is certainly great to see how these things are kind of transpiring right now.
It's also real quick, and then we can talk about things we're supposed to talk about. It's also the only sporting event that I've watched probably in the last 6 months that did not have an active betting line showing me how I could bet on the game for the entirety, which was something that like I realized it about partway through one of the games the other time. I was like, they haven't flashed up like an over under on runs. They haven't flashed up like a plus minus on these kit. Like I just get to watch a sport. No one's telling me to put money on it. It's kind of amazing.
Yeah.
So it was, I don't know, that was an interesting like new age sport watching thing that I was accustomed to. I never assumed I'd see it, and now I'm shocked when I don't see it, which was kind of an
Yeah.
interesting dichotomy.
Yeah. No DraftKings logo or popping up on Little League World Series. Thank God.
No, no, not yet.
Yeah. So we move from Little League World Series into some talks more about NIL and the House versus NCAA case has been on everybody's mind of how it's impacting certain schools and certain sports and things like that. I had the pleasure of interviewing my friend who's an assistant wrestling coach at Rutgers and asked him how they approach these things and how they are continuing to evolve every single day with how things are changing and what that changing landscape looks like for an Olympic sport too. So the wrestling world is obviously very different than the football world or the basketball world or even the softball world these days. We've seen Texas Tech making those grand changes to their roster as the World Series was coming to a close. But as we're looking at NIL and the new rev share, the questions about opting in and opting out start to come to a head. And I think we spoke last time, and I gave some different perspectives on what I was hearing with different schools opting in and how money was being allocated to different schools. But I know you wanted to kind of take that a step further. So why don't I allow you to kind of dig into some of the nuance and things that you have seen as we're seeing schools opt in and opt out and try to allocate money here and there.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting, when July came around, it was sort of this drop of the hat, if you will, of like, hey, you're either in or you're out. You got to make a decision. And everybody was hemming and hawing about, are we going to do this? Are we not going to do this? And now we finally have the numbers. We know which Division One schools have opted in. We know which Division One schools have opted out. And I thought it was just interesting to highlight, for those that aren't sort of staring at these lists every day like you and I are and kind of analyzing different schools and why and things like that. I first just kind of wanted to give a general overview of kind of what that looked like landscape wise, right?
Mm,
There's a couple of full conferences that completely opted out. And then there's varying numbers of schools and different conferences that opted out for one reason or another. So I wanted to just kind of briefly go over that list, talk a little bit about why certain schools opted out and certain reasons, and then kind of talk about broadly what were the main sort of hesitancies for the schools that did opt out to do so, because we had a chance to chat with a couple of mid-major university, admins to just kind of see what was the conversation like whenever you were in that room. How were you guys deciding whether or not you were gonna, give this thing a try, for lack of a better term? And I think the funny part was largely that was kind of the consensus. For folks that could swing it budget-wise, or for folks that were curious about it, a lot of the conversation that I seemed to hear was like, or that we both seemed to hear was kind of like, well, we'll give it a shot and we'll see how
hmm
it goes, which is such an interesting sort of thing to hear in college sports. We're so accustomed to the NCAA being downright archaic in the way that the rules are written. So you just assume the same thing over and over again. For these schools to then show up and just go like, we really don't know what this is going to look like. So we're going to try and see how it goes and see if we can hang and go from there. And like what we've talked about, what it looks like today is not at all what it's going to look like in even 6 months, much less a year or 2 years. So I kind of get where they're coming from. Like, yeah, try it. See if it makes sense. See if you guys can manage it on the budget side. But like I said, just to kind of give a general overview for the opt-in and opt-out. There's two conferences in the Division One landscape that completely opted out. The Ivy League was kind of the first obvious one. They sort of said from the beginning, we're not getting involved in this. We're the Ivy League. We're going to poke our pinkies out, and you guys can go do your own thing. We're going to be over here in the corner. Great, cool, makes sense. They weren't giving us scholarships anyway, so who cares? The other group that was doing that decided to opt out, which still makes sense, is the Patriot League. So Lafayette, Holy Cross, Colgate, Navy, Army, which they're doing it because they're a Federal Service Academy, Lehigh, Bucknell, Loyola in Maryland, Boston University, and American University. So those full conferences opted out, which wasn't super surprising from an academic standpoint. They kind of have done their own thing forever. So
hmm
that isn't super surprising in the fact that they did that. Then you start to kind of get into these partial conference opt-outs. And in reality, when we look at the numbers, I think there was only like 50 schools or 54 schools that opted out of this program. So it's easier to talk about the schools that aren't competing than it is to
Yeah.
talk about the schools that are, in all honesty. And the vast majority of the schools outside of the Federal Service Academies that decided to opt out were FCS schools, which again, not terribly surprising, right? They're not competing in the highest football conference. Therefore, their rationale for opting in or opting out was a little bit driven by probably sales and different things like that. So
hmm
you had most of the Northeast Conference opting out, Central Connecticut, Stonehill, New Haven, to list a few. You had about half of the Big Sky Conference. You had notably not the Montanas, just to kind of point out. You had about half of the Atlantic Sun Conference, about half of the Big South, and then you have smatterings of schools, right? You have Iona, Manhattan, and St. Peter's out of the MAC. You've got the Citadel and VMI on the Southern Conference, which again is probably more tied to their military,
Yeah.
commitments than anything else. Houston Christian and Incarnate Word in the Southland Conference, and it goes down, and you have, various little one-offs in these different conferences across the board, kind of on the D1 side. But again, the shocking part was how many schools said, "Hey, you know what? We're going to give it a shot." Um, so yeah, I didn't know. And before I kind of go on to the other section here, were there any schools that you saw from the opt-in or opt-out that was surprising to you for any reason, or was it all kind of, yeah, it sort of makes sense to me?
It all kind of made sense, right? And I've I used to do commentary at Princeton, so I know the ins and outs a little bit, I guess, when it comes to the Ivies and seeing how they
Mhm.
operate. And like I said, I work on a Olympic sport. So when you're looking at the Olympic sports, you know that Olympic sports are part of the have-nots in a lot of these cases. There's 0.0001% that are the haves when it comes to at least college wrestling of having the money to do these things. Um, I'm pretty sure that all of the Big Ten opted in. I'm pretty sure that all of the Big 12 as well was one of those opt-ins. So there's been and obviously, like I said, when I look at things from a wrestling standpoint, and not just, again, I shouldn't say just wrestling standpoint, but from an Olympic sports standpoint, you're thinking, what are the criteria to opt in for any of this? And it's championship caliber. It is, what is our fan base and what is the appetite for this sport? So while Olympic sports are certainly more niche than anything else than baseball or football or basketball, you look at the opt-ins and the opt-outs, and they are pretty feasible in my estimation for the most part. The
Mhm.
ones for me that were not were schools like Campbell. So Campbell Wrestling actually just got a new head coach, and on top of that, they cut scholarships towards like the end of last year.
Mhm.
So, and to put it in perspective, wrestling only had 9.9 scholarships last year. Uh, so, and for a wrestling team, you need 10 wrestlers. So, essentially, not one wrestler was on a full scholarship, right? Like, not every single one of them, I should say, not every single one of them was on a full scholarship. There was a good portion that was not. Lots of them were getting, money for books and partial scholarships, and, NIL comes in and obviously becomes a little bit more helpful. But I say all that to say this, right? Is schools that can afford to do it will do it, and you're hopeful that in the, I guess, search for getting more revenue for your athletes, that you don't rob the athletes that are part of other sports of the glory of being an athlete. And
Mhm.
that for me is the kind of the top of the line thing, because as I said, I'm speaking to Olympic sports athletes and coaches. And cutting sports for me is never good, because you're robbing
Mhm.
somebody of an opportunity. And the impact that sports have on people that we can obviously speak to firsthand from being college athletes is, you don't get that anywhere else. You get it nowhere else. It is nothing. There's nothing like being an athlete on the high level, regardless of D2, D3, NAIA, no matter what it is. There's nothing like it. So cutting sports for me is the never an option. And obviously I'm not the one writing the check, but I just knowing the discipline and the things that come from these sports is why I look at it the way that I do. So, and that's why I kind of have that perspective of like, why is this school opting in when they are barely floating by when it comes to revenue to just uphold a program, right? And that's the thing for me where I'm like, it's more so of why did this school opt in instead of being confused of why a school opted out. You always can understand why a school opted out. It's because of revenue, everything else. But when schools opt in and they never showcase the fact that they have that kind of a wallet, it makes you scratch your head. So that was, my perspective of these opt-ins and opt-outs, is just seeing who did opt in and if it was a complete outlier, and then trying to follow the trend line of where the opt-in takes you. The opt-in will, in most cases, inevitably take you to sports being cut, and that is the issue.
Yeah, and I think that segues really nicely into kind of what I wanted to talk about next, which is sort of, which is why some schools opted out. And I think you hit on a really big one that, in my opinion, I share your feeling on that. I wish that the schools came from the baseline of how do we maintain the number of kids that are able to compete at these schools,
Mm-hmm.
right? Given my perspective, not being in charge of the budget line, things like that, obviously that's going to be my preference on that is give more kids opportunities to compete, give more access to kids to be able to get at universities. Um, that to me is, kind of what the heart of college sports really comes down to. But again, it's capitalist now, and that's not really what it works off of. So to your point, I would also look at that and say, hey, if you're losing kids in school, like what is that doing to your bottom line? And you're not alone in that. The number one thing that we have sort of read about and or heard about, not only in the athletics department, but also with like, admissions and enrollment, which is what I spend a lot of time I talking to folks in, is the roster cap concerns. And
Mm-hmm.
you and I, the roster cap concerns is centered around, hey, you're cutting off opportunities for kids to compete, right? From a school perspective, the roster cap concerns is exactly what you mentioned. It's a tuition driving mechanism for so many schools, right? So if you're putting in a roster limit for, let's say, a football team, right, and you've got to now lose 20 kids on your roster as walk-ons, those are kids that are paying their way at that university. And for schools that are not as endowed as the University of Texas that just lives on West Texas oil money, like that means something. That means a lot when you think about how much college costs nowadays. And so, where do you find that? Where do you make that up, right? Where does that get filled in on the budget line? And some schools just couldn't make it happen, right? I think to your point, I would argue there's plenty of schools out there that opted in almost on just the pureness of like FOMO, like fear of
Mm-hmm.
missing out. Like we got to at least be in the conversation and see how this goes. And the folks that did, opted out, I think one of the big reasons for that was like we can't make the numbers make sense, right? So it
Yeah.
was that sort of coupled with timing and planning, right? So like Omaha was a school that was cited. They had already had their budget set for the following year. They were not going to go in and figure out where they could trim things to account for this new model, right? They just aren't going to do it. They might opt in next year, cool. But for this year, they were like, we're not going to put people in a spot where we're going to fire folks in the next 3 weeks to make this try and make sense, and then potentially opt out again, right? So roster caps and timing and planning on the budget side, I think was a really big piece of it. The other things that people noted, obviously, financial limitations was another one people noticed, right? They don't have 20 mil or a competitive number close to 20 mil to toss around in their budget to be able to work with kids. It was kind of like if we're just going to throw them $100 and some scratch, like what's the point? And really,
Yeah.
what we're not going to make money back on the roster caps that we lose with that level of competition. So what are we doing here? And then lastly, there was a lot of mention of Title IX uncertainty, right? I mean, like there, and I know you're going to talk about it kind of in your lion's share of kind of your side of this conversation on the lawsuit piece, but like people are nervous about that, right? Just because it's fine right now doesn't mean that in, oh, I don't know, 3.5 years is maybe a good time to guess. It's not going to become a conversation or something that gets more federal state backing because of what it is and what role it's always played in college sports and in the college landscape as a whole. So there's definitely some hesitation on that front. I'll be curious to see what the opt-in, opt-out number looks like a year from now, right? I mean, this to me is a big response of everyone saw it and they said, if we can feasibly try it this year, let's try it. Let's see how it goes. Is it going to make a difference? And then they sort of evaluate from there. Um,
Yeah.
what's interesting to me about that though is that, and this is something that I kind of want to pay more attention to. I'm a little bit tinfoil hat on this one, so I'll leave my thoughts on this. But this opt-in program applies to the sports that are Division One at schools that are not wholly Division One. If that
Yeah.
so, for example, Colorado College is a really good example here. They are a Division Three institution, right? Largely, but their men's ice hockey team and their women's soccer team compete at the Division One level. They have the option and have chosen to opt in to rev sharing, so they now have that same $20.7 million pot that everybody else has, but they only have two Division One sports that they have to worry about roster limits for, and they have to worry about pay for play for. So, I mean, theoretically, if Colorado College had a big donor, they could just have a $20 million hockey team or soccer team, or a
Yeah.
$10 million hockey team and a $10 million soccer team, and fund all of their Division One sports. It's the same thing. Dallas Baptist University is a really big one for baseball. They're Division One in baseball. I think, let's see here. There's Minnesota State, Minnesota Duluth, St. Cloud State, Lake Superior State, Michigan Tech, Colorado College, Dallas Baptist, Johns Hopkins, and Augusta. Those are the ones that I've got on my list that are opting in, that are not Division One institutions, but have Division One sports on their books.
Hmm.
And I just kind of like the idea of there being potential chaos in that situation, where like especially men's and women's ice hockey, I feel like is where it could be the biggest impact because I would say half, if not probably closer to 70% of these schools that are opting in specifically for men's or women's ice hockey. So
Hmm.
like, I don't know, man. I kind of like the idea of somebody coming in and just causing chaos in one of those places because they can just literally fund that entire group and they don't largely have to like change a lot of other things they're doing, from what I understand, in their athletics department. If they can fund those particular sports and everything else stays the same, they're not losing those walk-ons to the other places. They're not losing that tuition. Yeah, they're losing a couple spots maybe at these different sports, but like not enough to justify not opting into this program and being able to play ball with the other people on those things. So that's where I'm going to leave it. I'm really curious to watch that over the next couple of years to see if somebody kind of like just decides they want to they decide one day that you know what, Lake Superior State men's ice hockey, they're going to beat everybody and we're going to make sure of it because we can
Yeah,
fund $20 million to that one team.
man, that would be serious. Like I one of the things that you said too that kind of caught me was that you don't have to opt in this year as well. You can opt in next year. So if you can opt in the year after, right? So if it takes you a little over a year to get your ducks in a row, then more power to you. Do it. So I feel like in the next 2 to 3 years, we'll see more teams opting in and opting out, right? It'll probably look kind of like a game of musical chairs of like, are we okay, like we're double dutch, right? Like when are we gonna jump in? One of those kinds of things. Um, because there's so much uncertainty. I've said it a number of times on this show and others. We need collective bargaining, and that will certainly go into my portions. But like, there has to be guardrails. There really has to be because there's no reason why you should have an $8 million quarterback in college. You shouldn't. You should not at all. Those contracts should not be comparable to professionals. College is where you go to certainly grow and gain that knowledge so that when you do move on to the next level, be it a professional football team or a corporate office, you have the knowledge and the skills to operate there. It shouldn't be a means of people wanting to gain other medical red shirts to stay in college and gain more money because the contract is bigger for them to stay at LSU than it is to be an undrafted rookie in the NFL.
Hmm.
So that was something that like I said that I caught on to with you is that you had said is about people opting in from year to year. But like it's certainly going to be the Wild West. It really is. And I mean, I'm kind of here for it because something is going to have to be absolutely crushing, I believe, in order for us to get optimal change and actual rules instead of making it so crazy, to be completely honest. But right now it is. And we're seeing different schools opt in and opt out over the next couple of years. That's like I said, it's going to be a game of musical chairs of who's in this game, who's out, right? Like ante up. Let's see who's playing in this game this year. And we'll go from there.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch over the next year or two just to see how much this fluctuates as people kind of figure out where they truly sit kind of in this conversation and what that
Hmm.
looks like. And maybe that is the impetus for these larger schools to then again sort of establish this argument of like, hey, we're different than these other schools now, and we
Yeah.
need to talk about what that looks like and how we divide those things. But it's I think this actually makes for a pretty good segue to roll into kind of your portion of this is you may be listening to this right now and going, well, Reid, Ryan, these schools aren't going to be able to pay $20 million contracts to these hockey players because the College Sports Commission is here and they have NIL Go and they're going to make sure that these collectives and these universities are giving fair trade and good value market and that's going to keep it, that's going to keep everything regulated. Well, I'll let you talk a little bit more about it here in a minute because you've been paying more attention to it than I have, and it's going to roll into the other litany of things that are kind of going down. but we might have broken a record for how quickly a new organization or commission got bullied out of their initial plans
Yeah.
in real time, which was incredible. I mean, to watch them like deny or try to deny these collective deals that got submitted on July 1st, and then I think by like July 10, the College Sports Commission had basically changed their rules because the amount of lawsuits that came in
Hmm.
asking them what their justification was for denying certain like primarily collective based deals that were being offered. So with that, I want to pass it over to you. And how about you give us just kind of the let's talk lawsuits for a little bit and kind of what that
Yeah.
looks like.
It's an interesting dynamic with the College Sports Commission and NIL Go. Um, if you didn't listen to our last show, we talked about this College Sports Commission and NIL Go and how they will be the regulators for these NIL deals. And what that entails, the portion of it is any, this is probably the most important part. Any NIL deal over $600 has to be submitted to the College Sports Commission and NIL Go, which means that as soon as they were up and running, you opened you opened the storefront and were flooded with customers and bombarded by all these deals that probably span from $601 to 8 million if you're Carson Beck, right? So the issue there is that, and this is my guess, right? Is for the sake of efficiency, things were denied or things were passed through for the sake of efficiency. Because how big, and I don't know how many people are personnel are in the College Sports Commission. I don't know how many people are part of it, but it can't be as big of a client base that they have coming out of college. It's impossible. If you have one account rep for each one of these deals, it's not going to happen. It's that would essentially mean that so many people should have jobs right now and they don't. So the effectiveness of the College Sports Commission was already put in play when so many of these deals came into play and they were denied. And then these agents and these lawyers of the collectives were like, well, we think you're wrong and here's why, and our lawyer is going to explain it to you. And then they were like, okay, we're going to talk to this, we have a meeting with this lawyer over here. And they were like, okay, well, there's 50,000 other lawyers that we're going to have to squeeze in during the week. That's not going to happen. So they had to pivot and they had to change things, because if they didn't, it was going to continue on and continue on. It's like, what was the movie Bruce Almighty, where he opens the filing cabinet and it just launches him across the room? That's
All this
essentially
prayer
what it looked
requests.
like, right?
Yeah.
Like all of those files just poured out of that filing cabinet, and they had to figure something out, right? So they were basically bullied into changing their methods. And that's the funny part about it is I'm asking for guardrails, and I've always asked for guardrails, and the guardrails that they put in place were essentially made out of tissue paper. It was just like it was like the banner that, to keep it with youth sports, it's like the banner that the Pee Wee football team runs through onto the field before the game. They just ran straight through it with lawyers and their own red tape and litigation. So it was just like, you think that this is where you want to go, but it's not. So you really have to re-examine. So all in within, the first couple of weeks of the College Sports Commission and NIL Go even being in place, they denied a bunch of people, which people were like, "Yay, that's great! They're actually doing their job. They're looking at these NIL deals for what they are. They're putting some things in place." And then the lawyers were like, "Not so fast. Here's why. What is your rationale? Because we're going to challenge this." And it didn't work very well for them. So they're pivoting, and as you would expect, they're pivoting quickly, and they're going to have to continue to pivot very quickly so that your $8 million, $7 million, $6 million quarterback or point guard or whatever else can be on the floor, so that your rev share numbers are continuing to go up. So if they're not, there's an even bigger issue when it comes to the school, because the schools are going to start to come to the College Sports Commission and NIL Go, and you're not just going to have an issue with the collectives, the very high powered collectives. You'll also have a problem with the schools, because if the schools are allocating 20.5 million to pay these players and get the deals for these players, and they're not getting them, then somebody is in breach of contract, and they're going to have to truly figure it out, because it's like, you told me I was going to make X amount of dollars and I haven't been paid any of this money yet. Why? And you have to figure it out, because we have to submit to the College Sports Commission. So as in essence, NIL Go, College Sports Commission, great. I love it. But they definitely have to shore up some of these holes, because if not, it's going to continue to look like hot lava through a paper cup if they don't.
I think, yeah, I mean, if I'm Charlie Baker right now, I'm just ripping Nickelback in my office and just crushing every drink I can find. Like, I mean, he, to his credit, like his job is to protect the NCAA, and he found a way to basically do the bare minimum on the NCAA side and then take all of this stuff that the NCAA that should have arguably been in charge of managing as the, oversight committee for college sports, and basically just said all the worst stuff, College Sports Commission, go sue them instead.
Mm-hmm.
And he just set the, I mean, so again, like as much as it's kind of the, don't hate the player, hate the game kind of a deal. It's like, man, his job was to protect the NCAA at all costs, and that was it. And based on how this has gone since July 1st, he's kind of doing a great job of it so far. He's not out of the weeds just yet. I know we've got some stuff to talk about as far as like appeals on like back-based settlement allocations and things like that. But I mean, shoot, man. Like for the College Sports Commission to just get the wrath of, to your point, players and schools and collectives in a 2 week span, to the point where they had to literally like rethink their entire process, was kind of incredible to watch in real time. There's an element of it that I think is totally fair from the standpoint of like, you've got to launch it, you have to see where the gaps are and then fill in the gaps. Like I've got no problem with that whatsoever. It's part of launching anything new. But I've never seen it happen so fast and so aggressively, except for
Yeah.
like internet bullying. I feel like sometimes like content producers will sometimes get this in a very like isolated moment. I've never seen like a true association have it happen that quickly.
Yeah, not just them, right? And this, the other topic, it's tied to things that are going on with the NIL and NIL Go and College Sports Commission, of them facing challenges. They're not the only ones facing challenges, right? There's a lawsuit that followed after the House versus NCAA case came out, and the face of that was Livvy Dunne, and she was already very vocal about a lot of these things before it was settled, and became more vocal. And I think there's a group of 8 female athletes challenged a settlement of back pay provisions based on concerns related to Title IX. So Title IX already coming into play, which is something that if you paid attention for 5 seconds, you knew what happened. But on top of that, there's so many other things that they are challenging, and the three core things that they are challenging, or at least the objections to this, are undervalued athletes, lack of transparency, and exclusion from negotiation. So that last point goes to my first point of needing collective bargaining. You're having these conversations without the people that are affected the most, which are the athletes. So there is no college sports players association. You don't have those things. So it is adults in a room negotiating these things that have no skin in the game outside of the power that they wield. And that's part of the issue, is you're now excluding certain athletes because of their quote unquote value, right? Like everything is value based in all of it. And when you look at how the negotiations took place, they took place behind closed doors, and then what you got was whatever came out in the court case. So that's where the lack of transparency comes through, because you don't know what was said in those boardrooms and in those meetings to get to this point where the House versus NCAA case was settled. So that in and of itself is the issue, because if you are legislating it, that in and of itself is the issue, because all it does is rebrand the issues from before, where players didn't have a say and they still don't have a say. But it's like, you're getting paid to not have a say now. You shouldn't be upset, when it's in actuality, it's like, we appreciate the money. However, we would like to be part of the negotiation. It's like somebody, buying you a car and you're not part of the sale whatsoever, but they're just like, here, aren't you happy? You should be so happy. I did this for you. And you're like, well, what are the payments? What's this? How are any of these things figured out? So it's just so much unknown for these athletes that really truly sucks for them. And there's just, there's a lot of different challenges that are in here. One of the other ones is challenges related to the eligibility rules, where in this article that I'm reading, it says the existing eligibility rules, like those regarding junior college transfers, have already faced challenges and continue to be debated. Junior college transfers are no longer starting their clock early anymore. So when you're in junior college, your NCAA clock is not starting. So now there's an issue there where you can be an NIL athlete.
Well, if that goes through, that'll be the case. They got that
If that goes
injunction for
through.
the year, but
Yes.
which all intents and purposes, we expect there to be a wave of lawsuits if the
Oh
injunction
yeah.
holds on that 1 year and people know they can make more money. I think you're making a really, in my opinion, common inference that's gonna. I'm telling kids right now, like when I talk to them, like when they go to juke, I'm like, listen, this is the first time that I can ever tell somebody it's reasonable for you to consider junior college and not assume automatically that it's going to take away from your NCAA eligibility. By the time
Yeah.
you go through a year or two of JUCO, there's a world where litigation is such that you can just get those years back effectively whenever you transfer. So to your point, yeah, you're basically adding 2 more years of development and opportunity to make money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we'll certainly see kind of how these things pan out. There's a number of different elements to this, right? There's challenges to the new enforcement structure, which we just spoke about with College Sports Commission and NIL Go. There's challenges to the employment status. Athletes, I can't remember what school that was where they deemed their athletes as employees, but that's going to start to crop up as well. Is, if we're now part of your payroll, where we're now a true line item of where the money is going from you to me, what does that make me? It can't make me an athlete. It makes me a student athlete, but under the
Hmm.
rules of the NCAA, even though this House versus NCAA case is now the kind of the new law of the land, by calling me a student athlete, it kind of negates that money transfer, where I have to be somewhere in the middle between employee and student athlete. There's got to be some common ground in that aspect. So I feel like that will be the next thing that come to play. And there was a lawsuit filed in 2019 that dealt with this too. So if anyone listening gets a chance, look up the Johnson versus NCAA, which was filed in 2019, and it aimed to classify athletes as employees entitled to minimum wage compensation. So there's already been lawsuits about it. There's going to be even more now that they are certainly being paid. So it's going to be interesting. The other one that's going to come into play is how different states police these things, because there are certainly different state laws. I mean, if you look at the Quinn Ewers situation from a couple of years ago. Quinn Ewers goes to Ohio
Hmm.
State because he can't earn NIL money as a Texas high school athlete. Does essentially a red shirt year, a gray shirt year there, and then comes back home to Texas and is now an NFL quarterback, right? So like, different states have different regulations and different stipulations when it comes to NIL. So you will have to succumb to that too. On top of that, taxes. So there's a bunch of different nuance to this, right? Where you hear a lot of professional athletes talk about, man, it would be awesome to play for the Lakers organization, but the taxes in LA and in California that's a steep hit to my paycheck. Where if I go and play for San Antonio, where there is no state tax and things are different, I like that situation a lot better. So you
Hmm.
are certainly going to run into those conflicts of state laws and state taxes and how everything kind of comes to play. I'm front row, sitting up in my seat, getting ready to get all the education of the fallout. But right now, it's not looking very good with all the challenges that have come to play, whether it be this case with Livvy Dunne as the face of it, or at least the not case, but the objections with Livvy Dunne as the face of them, and or the College Sports Commission and NIL go.
Yeah, you make a really good point on specifically on the employment side is the part that I think I'm probably the most interested in following over the next couple of years because it does
Mhm.
feel like different state, federal, school levels are trying to kind of solve this problem. It almost feels like we need to discover a new employment status is kind of what it comes down to. Like it's a
Yeah.
weird or like employment with considerations or something. I think about and obviously we're talking about adults here, so it'd be a different situation, but I think about I watched a or read I did something about like child actors and how they are employed, but they've got these very specific stipulations about employment, work conditions, and there's
Hmm.
established accounts for them where that, X amount of their earnings go into an account that nobody can touch. So they're protected and they're able to gain interest and act as a shield. I see a world where now, with how sort of capitalized this whole thing is, I find it hard to believe we'd be able to get any of this through, especially given that politically the goal is to just vote against whoever's across the aisle from you and not really worry about what the actual, results are. However, in a perfect world, to me, it seems like we almost need to establish that, okay, these college athletes live in this weird twilight zone, right? Where they're adults, they're representative of the school, they have an opportunity to earn these individual, revenue streams. There's still this attachment to the school, and there's rules that come with that. So, do we then create something or redefine something that allows them to sort of, again, let's get a collective bargaining agreement together. Let's have people from both sides of the aisle meet, and let's say what needs to be put in here to where everybody is at least getting something they're happy with, right? It's the word that we're allergic to, compromise, but finding a way to structure it in such a way that athletes are supported, protected, have an opportunity to build that wealth or come in with opportunities, economic opportunities, but not do it in such a way that the rich can manipulate the tax code and continue to make money
Hmm.
and take advantage of these kids because they're 18 and they're, just sort of LLCs floating in the wind, waiting to be ushered in different directions as personal businesses themselves. And other kids just get taken advantage of by agents who aren't agents and have no backing, or groups and organizations that say they're going to help them, or family that wants to help them but isn't in a life place to do so. And so the money that they earn goes away. Like there's just too many. We pretend like these kids turn 18 and all of a sudden we can treat them the same as you do, Micah Parsons going through his negotiation, right? And we forget that like for Micah to get where he's at, there's things he needed to go through. There's a collective bargaining agreement that protects his ability to negotiate and protects his ceiling and his floor on what he can do. There's an agent who had to go to specific schooling and earn specific credentials to represent him in that space to make sure that ethically everyone is taken care of. There's transparency in the pay structure to know that where that money is going where it's supposed to go. All these
Hmm.
things we have set up and we obviously know how to do it. And for whatever reason, we all just basically decided that like, these kids are 18. They're fine. They got it. They can manage this stuff. What are you talking about? Like, we've enabled them. What else do you want us to do? We've enabled them. What? Like I don't know. That's crazy to me in a vacuum, personally.
Yeah, it makes no sense. It honestly does. The only other thing, and this is my last note, is you mentioned the political landscape of it. There's already a political, I guess, avenue that is taking place of an executive order that was signed by the president to stop third party pay for play NIL deals from happening. Um, that's what the College Sports Commission was for. But I'll tell you right now, if you don't think that the NCAA was lobbying their government contacts to make this happen, because think about how quickly that happened after the House versus NCAA case was done. executive order got done that quickly. There was a lobby in for a good bit of time to make sure that this happened, right? So, and on top of that, the NCAA has wanted to have government interaction in the NIL space for quite a couple of years. I heard it firsthand at a conference from the ex-commissioner that they have, that was something that was being looked at. So it's no surprise that the political landscape of an executive order already has come into play. I wish and hope that, again, people put a pause to all the decision making for a hot second and remember that these are still undeveloped kids that they are dealing with. You're 18 to 22 for the most part. This is the last year of the COVID kids essentially in college, having multiple years of eligibility past that 4-year allotment that we normally had. This is the last year for it. So the 26, 27-year-old, you're not going to get another Chris Winkie unless it's somebody that went off and played baseball and then came back to college, just like he did. So the end of that era is coming to a close. And I feel like people truly forget that the age of the athletes that they are working with. So sit back for just a second, remember who you are working with. But then on top of that, do a little bit more when it comes to putting things in place to regulate all the stuff that's happening. If you have to put a salary cap on things, if you have to put more agents in place, if you have to give these kids representation at their schools, do those things. Do the athlete education thing. Do right by the athlete, because without the athlete, you don't have a job.
No notes.
Well, as always, it's super fun chatting about these topics and reading about these topics and digging into them. We'll, be back again pretty soon with even more of these topics as these things pop up. I know we've been kind of harping on the NIL House versus NCAA landscape for a while, but it's an ever changing, it's a merry-go-round. It's ever changing. There's always something that is happening, whether it is new challenges or the College Sports Commission and NIL Go, or anything else that we have spoken about, any type of fallout that has been going on since this even started. So we'll keep you guys in the loop on all these different topics. As always, we appreciate the likes, the shares, the comments, all the different support. Keep that stuff coming. We look forward to the next time when we get a chance to give you guys some of the different knowledge. If there's ever anything that you want us to dig into, don't be afraid to reach out. You can head to our website, or you can just leave it in the comments on any of these different places, whether it be Spotify, Apple, or YouTube. But again, we appreciate you guys. For Reid, Meyer, I'm Ryan Holmes. We'll see you again next time.